Welcome to the Peak of Geek, where we've hit the top but with no plans to stop. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I tend to find myself obsessing over certain things I'm into. It changes with the wind, but I always return to my favorites. Can you see why this channel is so all over the place? It's matched perfectly to my wild and unpredictable brain. One of the things I frequently return to is my undying love for Japanese manga and anime. While my first love was Dragon Ball, in fact I made a whole video about how that still holds a special place in my heart, I have to admit, my favorite series is Eiichiro Oda's One Piece. Personally, I've been following the misadventures of Monkey D. Luffy and his pirate crew since I saw their goofy faces in the pages of American Shonen Jump back in 2003. Since then, I've continued to read and collect the manga, watch the anime and movies, and also play the many video games over the years. But if I had to pick one game series that not only perfectly captures the action and epic story of One Piece, but might actually stand as the best way to experience any anime and any video game ever, it would have to be One Piece Pirate Warriors from Koei Tecmo. Before the two Japanese video game companies merged together, Koei and Tecmo began developing and publishing titles for the arcade in the 1980s. In 1983, Koei released a game that would go on to define a franchise and help establish a brand new genre, the strategic tactical role-playing game. Nobunaga's Ambition first hit Japanese computers, but would also see North American releases on the NES, Super NES, and Sega Genesis starting in 1988. Throughout the 80s, Koei would continue focusing on creating tactical RPGs, including one about Genghis Khan, and another that would truly stand the test of time, and see sequels still releasing today. Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Based on the Chinese historical novel of the same name, this long-running series sees the player managing resources and battle units to ultimately unify the warring states of China. Each game changes things up a little, but you'll almost always find yourself examining maps, wading through politics, deploying soldiers, and deciding the best way to proceed. If I'm being completely honest, most of it goes way over my head, but there's absolutely an international audience for this in-depth beloved franchise. Then, in 1997, Koei decided to break away from tactical RPGs and create a one-on-one fighting game for the PlayStation 1 called Dynasty Warriors. Characters from Nobunaga's Ambition and Romance of the Three Kingdoms would appear as playable characters, and reviews at the time were quite positive. I've never played this one myself, but it seems like it was a decent fighting game that managed to stand out a bit from the crowd. However, when Koei decided to develop a sequel for the PlayStation 2 a few years later, the team decided to change up the gameplay. So much so that fans at the time must have been confused. Instead of one-on-one fighting, this game was a hack-and-slash action game, which also incorporated a few tactical elements. As sequels continued to hit the PlayStation 2, Dynasty Warriors would refine its gameplay loop, while adding in multiplayer for one-on-one battles or cooperative adventuring. Fans of satisfying action games where you fight hundreds, and sometimes thousands of enemies with a few bosses along the way, enjoyed the Warriors series immensely. A few years later, Koei began releasing a sister series called Samurai Warriors that focused on characters from Japan's history instead of China's. And a few years later, Koei Tecmo would release a game I don't think anyone saw coming. They would take the gameplay style found in both Warriors series and apply it to a whole new franchise, Mobile Suit Gundam. Critically, reviews were mixed, but fans of this long-running 80s mecha anime seemed to enjoy the canon and non-canon stories found in all three games of this hack-and-slash series. This experimental move from Koei Tecmo proved successful, and a few years later, the team applied the Warriors gameplay style to another popular anime series with Fist of the North Star, Ken's Rage. Impressively, the game's Legend mode adapted the first half of Kenshiro's adventure, while Dream mode would let you play as other characters in little non-canon story arcs. A sequel released 2 years later with similar gameplay that covered even more of Fist of the North Star's epic narrative. Later that same year, Koei Tecmo would once again adapt the familiar Warriors gameplay style to a third highly popular anime series. And this time, it was One Piece. One Piece Pirate Warriors released on PlayStation 3, and regardless of if you'd played any of the previous Warriors games, The One Piece variation was almost like a dream come true for fans of Oda's work. At the time, this was a fantastic way to experience some of those incredible One Piece moments, while battling hordes of enemies and awesome bosses as the characters you'd grown to love. As a diehard One Piece fan, Pirate Warriors felt like the game I'd been waiting for. And when it was first teased back in 2012, I can't even tell you how badly I wanted that special edition Golden PS3. Maybe one day I'll shell out the funds and grab one on eBay. Before Pirate Warriors, I feel like I played every One Piece game out there. Fighting games, side-scrolling platformers, and I even modded my Nintendo Wii back in the day to play a Japanese import of an adventure game that was in retrospect only okay. Shout out to the other Unlimited Adventure fans out there. And I even flirted with the idea of buying a European 3DS so I could play the two-part sequel, Unlimited Cruise SP1 and 2, because I would have given almost anything to play out the Marineford arc. But playing Pirate Warriors was, and still is, the closest thing to experiencing the anime without actually watching the anime. A few liberties are taken with the story to fit the gameplay, but it was still so amazing. The first Pirate Warriors game, while amazing to play at the time, has since become a bit of a unique entry for the series. Unlike later games, this one incorporated more adventure exploration elements into the mix. Each level's map was revealed to you a bit at a time, and while there were moments where you had to fight hordes of enemies, there were also many awkward platforming segments, where you'd find an interactive part of the level and need to use Luffy's Gum Gum powers to move forwards. The creative charm of these segments will wear off quickly, and before long, it feels a bit like padding, and can definitely be a bit frustrating at times. Another unique element to this first Pirate Warriors game is the interactive cutscenes. There are a lot of amazing CGI movies here that accurately depict familiar anime moments, and often you'll need to press a certain button or a combination of buttons in order to damage or even finish off a boss. These can be satisfying and are usually faithful to the original story, but these QuickTime segments are a bit polarizing among gamers. I enjoy them when they're used sparingly, but I see why some people don't. While the main reason to play Pirate Warriors 1, 3, and 4 is to experience One Piece retold with simple but satisfying gameplay, the second game decided to try something different, with a brand new what-if scenario that featured all the One Piece characters at the time. You can think of these as an alternate universe version of events you've seen before, like visiting Skypiea as time-skip versions of the Straw Hat crew. This one is undoubtedly for fans who have a deep understanding of the original One Piece story, since it's filled with references and character interactions that will only really make sense to fans. Pirate Warriors 3 stands as the most complete game story-wise, and it's easily the one I've sunk the most hours into. There are tons of characters to unlock, and it satisfyingly hits most of the important moments throughout the Straw Hat's adventures. Notably, it starts from the very beginning with Luffy recruiting Zoro, and includes almost all major story events up to and including Dressrosa. Since that arc was ongoing at the time, developers decided to create an all-new ending for players, so keep that in mind if you decide to dive in. A similar tactic was used for Pirate Warriors 4, since the Wano arc was still in full swing. Speaking of, Pirate Warriors 4 may just be the best one of the bunch. This one takes a more stylistic approach to the design, not unlike the One Piece anime itself when it entered the Wano arc and drastically changed up the animation style. Similarly, the gameplay has also been tweaked to allow you to jump and attack in midair, since some of the bosses you'll fight are massive when compared to Luffy and his crew. I'll just say that if you enjoyed Pirate Warriors 3, you might love Part 4 even more. The overall presentation and attention to detail is a big reason why these games truly feel like you're playing through episodes of the anime as your favorite One Piece character. Like when fighting through hordes of enemies and you use a special attack to take down a bunch at once, a satisfying sound effect shows up on screen. Or like when you press select, it typically has a special effect, like taking off or putting on Luffy's iconic straw hat. Maybe it's just me, but I only put on the straw hat when I'm ready for a serious fight. And if you're somewhat new to One Piece, or if you need a small refresher on characters or certain terms, or if you simply love reading about your favorite series, there's a section in each game dedicated to character background, relationships, and more in the gallery. Since the release of the One Piece Pirate Warriors games, I've frequently heard that playing through them can be boring or repetitive. And sure, I can see that perspective, especially since many of the missions see you accomplishing similar goals. But the sheer joy of playing as different characters from all across the One Piece universe, while experiencing an abridged version of the story you know and love, almost changes the stakes and makes the gameplay feel less repetitive and more pointed. And since you're there to mainly match the buttons and pull off simple combos, you can easily follow along with the story, since the dialogue is spoken in Japanese with English subtitles in the bottom portion of the screen. And don't forget, since most of the game's story missions can be played cooperatively, it's the perfect game to play with your fellow One Piece fanatics. Since the release of Pirate Warriors, Koei Tecmo has gone on to expand the Warriors series with even more popular anime adaptations, like Berserk and Attack on Titan, while branching out even further to create similar games based on other popular franchises, like Dragon Quest, Fire Emblem, Persona, The Legend of Zelda, and more. If you fancy yourself a fan of Japanese anime, and you're looking for a simple but super fun way to experience your favorite stories, don't sleep on the multiple Warrior spin-offs. Gundam, Fist of the North Star, Berserk, and Attack on Titan are all worth playing if you're fans of those franchises. But the One Piece Pirate Warriors series might just stand at the very top of the best adaptation of anime to video game. It feels like it was only a few years ago when I was defending One Piece to anyone who would listen, that it was a series that's well worth anyone's time, and that it might even rival Dragon Ball as one that would transcend the targeted younger demographic to become something that would find fans of all ages and genders all over the world. Well, it's been over 25 years since Eiichiro Oda started writing and drawing the misadventures of a little pirate boy named Monkey D. Luffy. And it seems like One Piece has finally become a cultural phenomenon. In fact, the first video I ever made for this channel was partly me expressing my love for this series, in a very low quality way I might add, but also gushing about my excitement for the live action Netflix series. And I can proudly say that against all odds, Netflix nailed it. And by Netflix I mean Oda, who was intimately involved every step of the way. Obviously, several changes had to be made to adapt a series that's as silly and ridiculous as One Piece to live action, but overall, they did it. And incredibly, it was one of the highest viewed Netflix series when it debuted last summer. If you haven't seen it, absolutely give it a shot. We're even getting a second season, and I can't wait to see the debut of the Straw Hat Crew's adorable doctor. According to somewhat recent statements from Oda, we are finally heading towards the end of One Piece. It's incredible that it's lasted as long as it has, and it somehow still seems to get better with each and every chapter. And hey, if you're looking for another way to bring more One Piece love into your life, make sure you check out the Pirate Warriors series. While the first two games are unfortunately trapped on the PlayStation 3, parts 3 and 4, which cover most of the series story-wise anyway, are still available on most modern platforms and PC. So grab your favorite Straw Hat Pirate and set sail. But what about you? What do you think is the best anime video game of all time? Have you tried out the One Piece Pirate Warrior series? Let me know all about it down in the comments below, and until next time, You know, since One Piece had a successful live-action adaptation, and the recent Yu Yu Hakusho one was pretty good, I wonder if we should give Dragon Ball another shot. Nope, never mind. I regretted it as soon as I said it. Hey, hope you're having a super awesome day. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much, and I'll see you real soon.